Okay. Again, I'm Philip, one of the founders of Violet. Unlike Henry, I'm going to shill at the very end of my talk and tell you a little bit more about Violet and what we're building and a couple of things that we're up to. But today's talk, I actually wanted to talk about on or off-chain claims. And I think in Web3 specifically, in sort of the on-chain identity debate, we talk a lot about personal information, claims, attestation, what of that is supposed to be on-chain, what is supposed to be off-chain. And I think a lot of added confusion actually came through the soulbound token narrative that has just completely blown over. Maybe that's just my perception just because I'm knee-deep in identity, but I think there has been a lot of activity, to say the least, around soulbound tokens, and a lot of people seem to claim that this is their soulbound token, but in fact, the decentralized society paper is not a spec, right? It was ultimately a much more of a direction to guide research and help us think about these things. I think Vitalik does this actually really well, where sort of like he puts out something, and I think it usually is not it's not very specific, specifically how you may sort of like apply it in a more sort of like pragmatic or practical context, but it really gives a lot of reason to think, and I think that certainly is also true for the soulbound tokens. But I think one of the things that is specifically, again, going back to Web3 identity, that have been sort of like sides, I think, that have emerged within that debate. One side is that we have to use NFTs, right? If we use NFTs, we benefit from on-chain composability. It really sort of like it is the standard, as Henry mentioned before, that is sort of baked into the blockchain. So it makes these things so much easier. And I think there's probably a broader discussion around how much of these applications, social applications, wherever you want to use an identity infrastructure layer actually is on-chain versus what is off-chain. And then of course there's verifiable credentials, potentially even zero-knowledge proofs. So what I was going to do, sorry I'm jumping back and forth, but I was quickly going to dive into like the core similarities and differences of NFTs and verifiable credentials. And with NFTs, I also want to point out that NFTs can also be non-transferable. And in fact, we've been doing a bunch of work on non-transferable tokens. So just wanted to point that out, and I wanted to propose potentially a happy middle, right? Is there a way for these sort of like more Web3 type of use cases? Is there a way to sort of combine both? And I am going to talk about the use cases because I think that gives a lot of people just don't mention these enough. And I think we had a debate in the prior panel about the identity in the context of DeFi. So I can elaborate a little bit more on that. So NFTs versus verifiable credentials. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff probably is fairly common knowledge, I think, for most people in this room, but, similarities are obvious, right? They're both cryptographically verifiable. Both are self-sovereign, unless, of course, shared in public. As I said before, they can both be non-transferable. I think there has been a criticism about, again, NFTs being transferable, and as such, how they're actually self-sovereign. And both ultimately require trust because they both need to be signed and they both need to be issued or minted by someone. I think it's probably more interesting, however, to talk about the differences. And I think I know that there are probably going to be different opinions in this room, but I think in terms of like the ecosystem maturity, you could probably make the claim that VCs have been around for probably longer than NFTs. Yet NFTs have really benefited from the attention and the development in infrastructure that has gone into that ecosystem over really, I think, the past year, right? NFTs have completely blown up. So everyone is sort of like talking, everyone seems to be using NFTs. And as such, sort of the developer attention on NFTs is very high. It also implies, because NFTs, of course, are on-chain, on-chain or having something on-chain and transferring something on-chain, the cost is also decreasing. So that argument is also, I feel, a little bit overblown, where sort of verifiable credentials really ultimately rely on a wallet, and how many wallets exist today that have means from adoption that allow you, from a user perspective, to effectively manage your VCs. I hope Disco will be, of course, the big thing. And then there's key rotation, storage, and so forth. So I think probably one thing that's interesting to talk about specifically in the case of soulbound tokens was that you have the concept of guaranteed disclosure versus privacy control, right? if you have a system, a social system that really relies on certain social items or attestations to be public, to actually function, then that ultimately implies if you have a system that is only built, say, on verifiable credentials, where from a user perspective, you're ultimately fully in control over sharing or not sharing, then that may not be the right choice. So just want to point that out as we kind of move into the conclusion for sort of like the small comparison. And that is really, it depends on the use case. Again, I think, as I said before, there's just so little, I think, conversation and debate about potential use cases. So much effort and really, so much effort really has gone into sort of the standards and sort of like the infrastructure and so forth. And it really is time to think about use cases and productizing certain use cases. So not saying that that's the only thing that we should think about and should work on, of course, but it's the thing that at least Violet spends a lot of time thinking on. So with that, I wanted to talk about a happy middle before we dive into the use cases, just because I think that's important and helpful to understand. And this, again, also is not some secret recipe. I think there has been numerous conversations and publications about linking a verifiable credential that is stored securely off-chain, potentially even a fully self-sovereign way on a decentralized storage network, and linking it to a non-transferable token in a way that it doesn't reveal the actual contents of the verifiable credential. You still have some amount of data leakage, yet you have a gain in a sense that you really benefit from the on-chain composability and the use cases that are presented on-chain today. So we think at Violet, we think there's a pretty great design space for permissionings around the combination of tokens and verifiable credentials. There is potential for greater censorship resistance and data portability. I know that's spicy, and of course the composability aspect. So with that, talking about use cases, proof of humanity probably I don't need to talk about that deeply. I think I don't know if people here are part of the DAO or have participated in governance and voting and so forth. And it's obvious that Sybil resistance is a key topic on top of mind of many people that are building within DAOs, thinking about governance systems. So having a unique human vote, I think, is really key and really important. Under collateralized DeFi lending, as we talked about it before. So I put this a screenshot of a logo here, Ultraviolet. This is a hackathon project about building an identity escrow, so that if you facilitate an on-chain loan, if you are the lender, you could accept the board to not provide any collateral or provide less collateral if they would basically collateralize their identity information, such that in the case of a default or whatever is the condition around that primitive, the identity information actually would go to the lender. In theory, of course, opening up the path for proper legal recourse. Now, of course, you need proper signed contracts for that and so forth. So there's many kind of open questions, but I think for that, lending, but also other DeFi primitives, where you think about potentially having financial institutions participating, or if you think about any form of regulation that surely is going to be part of any financial system that exists in the future, there probably is going to be a need for some kind of identity layer. And I think to jump to Violet, I think that identity layer, specifically in the context of finance, is going to be about your human identity, as in your actual personal information, right? You surely have different identities across different games and social platforms and so forth, but really sort of like core human identity that is sort of like verified off-chain. Not saying that again, KYC is the only way to verify that identities off-chain, but it's one way to do it. We think that is a key primitive, potentially for many different use cases. So, Violet really is a organization that exists to evolve trust in Web3. I know that's a bold statement. We have a bunch of different trust primitives in Web3, in crypto. We ultimately have crypto, cryptography, math, and so forth. But I think human trust is underappreciated, and we're here to build the applications, infrastructure, tooling to make it work. And again, we're starting with DeFi. Mostly because we think that's an actual application that can yield an actual user base in the sort of like very near-term future. But of course, we keep being open-minded at many other different things as well. So I'm slightly before the end of my time, and thank you.